The scent of industrial bleach and lemon wax is the smell of being nobody. It's a sharp, sterile sting that's supposed to scrub the world clean, but under the citrus and chemicals I can still smell the phantom scent of cordite on my skin, a lingering ghost from a life I tried to bury. In this building I am an apparition in a gray uniform. I don't just wipe away the fingerprints of powerful men. I know exactly how to leave none of my own. I pushed the heavy buffer across the marble floors of the Chinois executive suite, the rhythmic thrum-thrum of the machine vibrating through my bones. At 50 stories up, the world is quiet, save for the storm currently clawing at the reinforced glass. To the Dragon of Soul and his lieutenants, I am part of the furniture. I am the shadow that empties the trash and vanishes before the sun rises. Then, the pocket of my uniform buzzed. I ended the machine. The sudden silence was deafening, filled only by the lash of rain against the windows. I pulled out my phone. A restricted number. I didn't need to answer to know who it was, but the ghost in me demanded I listen to the enemy. 200,000, Makena, the voice hissed, sounding like gravel turning in a blender. The interest doesn't sleep. We saw the girl at the park today. Ji-woo has such pretty hair. It would be a shame if she lost that smile because her stepmother couldn't keep her word. My grip tightened on the phone until the plastic groaned. My heart didn't skip a beat. Elite operatives are trained to regulate their pulse, but a cold obsidian rage settled in my gut. I'm paying, I whispered, my voice a low rasp. 7 days. I'll have it. Make sure you do. Or we'll collect in pain. The line went dead. I stood in the center of the opulence, surrounded by gold leaf and mahogany, feeling the suffocating weight of a debt that was designed to never end. I needed air. I needed to feel the chaos of the world, because the order of this penthouse was weighing me down. I stepped out onto the balcony. The storm hit me like a physical blow. The rain was torrential, freezing and violent. I walked to the edge, the water soaking my uniform in seconds, clinging to me like a second skin. I leaned my forehead against the cold steel railing and let the mask slip. I didn't sob. A ghost doesn't make noise. But I let the tears mix with the rain, my shoulders shaking as the sheer exhaustion of being nobody finally cracked my spine. I was alone. I was invisible. I was safe to break. Or so I thought. High above, in the darkened sanctuary of the primary office, Jang Bo-Sik sat in the shadows. To the world, he was a fallen titan, a man whose legs had been shattered by a rival's cowardice 3 years ago. He sat in his high-tech wheelchair, a king of a broken throne, his legs draped in silk, perfectly motionless. He noticed everything. He had spent years mapping the movements of his enemies from this seat, playing the cripple, letting them laugh at his weakness while he sharpened his claws in the dark. But as he watched the woman on the balcony, the quiet woman with the steady hands and the haunted eyes, the calculation in his mind stopped. He saw her break. He saw the strength drain out of her, replaced by a vulnerability that moved something deep within his cold, strategic heart. He didn't just move. He prowled. With a slow, fluid power that would have terrified his enemies, Bo-Sik stood. His legs were strong, his frame towering. He walked right up to the floor-to-ceiling glass, his stride silent and predatory. He pressed a hand against the cold pane, his eyes locked on the woman shivering in the rain. For 3 years, the lie had been his shield. But tonight, as he watched his maid, his woman, struggle under a weight she shouldn't have to carry alone, the lie dissolved. His heart, which had only ever beaten for revenge, finally pulsed with a new, dangerous purpose. Welcome to Annie's Empire of Love, where power meets vulnerability, and silence holds the deepest secrets. Tonight, you'll witness something rare. A man the world believes is broken, and a woman who has been invisible for far too long. He rules an empire from a wheelchair. She survives quietly in its shadows. But when he sees her crying in the rain, years of deception begin to unravel. This isn't just romance. It's loyalty. It's hidden strength. It's a love born inside an empire of secrets. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing our little dark romance family stretch across cities and time zones. To taper off, I felt a sudden sharp prickle at the base of my skull, the ghost sense. Someone was watching. Not just looking, but observing. I turned back toward the glass doors, My eyes scanned the darkened windows of the upper floor. There was nothing. The office was a void of blackness. The wheelchair sat in its usual spot, visible through the cracked door of the hallway. But the air had shifted. The static of the storm had been replaced by a heavy, possessive tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. I felt like I had stepped into a trap I didn't even know was set. I picked up my buffer, my fingers tingling. I was a ghost, and I had just been seen. The dragon wasn't just sitting in his tower anymore. He was hunting. And as I looked up at the darkened glass one last time, I realized that for the first time in years, I was afraid. Not of the debt collectors, but of the man who was supposed to be paralyzed. The next morning, the sun didn't rise over Seoul so much as it bled through a heavy curtain of smog, a bruised, purple light that offered no warmth. I arrived at the penthouse at 5 Lo Am, the hour of the wolf, when the city is caught between its darkest sins and its first breath of exhaust. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was my ritual of transformation. In the brushed steel reflection, I looked at Makena Brown, the widow, the cleaner, the invisible woman. I checked my fingernails, short, clean, devoid of the grease and burnt oil that used to define my life. I adjusted the stiff collar of my gray uniform. To the world, I was drowning in medical bills, a woman so broken she had forgotten how to speak above a whisper. But as the elevator chimed, my ghost protocols hummed beneath my skin. I scanned the floor for entry signs. The night security was lazy, their heavy footprints centered only on the path to the coffee machine. Amateurs. I moved through the kitchen, where the scent of expensive, dark roasted beans mingled with the metallic tang of filtered air. I prepared the tray with surgical precision. Jang Bo-Sik took his tea at exactly 5:30 am. Hibiscus and ginger, supposedly to aid circulation in limbs that didn't move. I carried the tray toward his study. My soft-soled shoes made no sound on the white marble, a skill perfected in the shadows of European embassies. I stopped at the threshold. He was there. He was always there. Bo-Sik sat facing the window, a statue carved from obsidian. The cashmere throw over his lap was perfectly draped, hiding the useless legs of the Dragon of Soul. But as I approached, the air changed. The static of last night's storm had been replaced by the pressurized atmosphere of a predator that had identified its prey. "Your tea, sir," I murmured. I set the tray on the low table. I took a deep breath, and that's when my training betrayed my calm. My eyes didn't just see him. They mapped him. Yesterday, his feet had been splayed at the limp, 45-degree angle of a T4 paraplegic. Today, his right foot was straight. It was tucked back, the heel resting firmly against the metal footrest. A paralyzed man cannot tuck his foot. I felt a cold spark in my gut. I didn't let my hands shake. Instead, I picked up a microfiber cloth and began to dust the mahogany bookshelves behind him. I watched him in the reflection of the glass-fronted cabinets. I saw the way his neck muscles corded, a subtle rhythmic pulsing of the carotid artery. He was hyper-aware of me. Then, beneath the fine silk of his trousers, a muscle flickered. A microcontraction. His quadriceps were firing, stabilizing his core as he leaned forward. A man who hasn't walked in 3 years has atrophied legs. Thin, pale, and lifeless. But the shadow I saw beneath that silk was the definition of a man who trained in the dark. He was faking. He was a king who had built a throne out of a wheelchair to deceive the world. I needed to be sure. I moved to adjust the teapot, and as I reached across him, I tripped on the edge of the rug. It was a perfect, practiced stumble. The heavy glass of cold water on the tray tilted, sliding toward his lap, the one place a paralyzed man shouldn't be able to protect. In that heartbeat, the world slowed. I saw his hand twitch on the armrest, his knuckles turning white as he suppressed the urge to catch the glass. But his body wasn't as disciplined as his mind. As the water spilled, his right knee jerked upward, a sharp, powerful reflex. He caught himself a millisecond later, freezing the leg in mid-air, but the secret was out. I caught the glass before it hit him, my fingers brushing the fabric of his thigh. I felt the heat of him. I felt the rock-solid tension of a soldier's muscle. My hand lingered a breath too long, pressed against the lie he had told the world. I straightened up slowly. I didn't apologize. I met his eyes in the reflection of the window. The silence was a physical weight, 2 people standing on a landmine. "You're very efficient, Makena," he said. his voice a low melodic rasp. He didn't turn around. Most people see a tragedy. They see a man who is half gone. But you look at me like I'm a puzzle. I see a man who pays me to keep his home clean, sir, I replied. I don't solve puzzles. I remove them. He turned his wheelchair then, the motor whirring softly. He faced me fully, his eyes searching for the ghost I had buried. Is that so? Then tell me, Makena. If you found something that wasn't supposed to be there, would you wipe it away? Or would you keep it? In my experience, sir, some things are too heavy to carry. It's better to act as if you never saw them at all. He leaned forward, his chest inches from mine. The scent of sandalwood and sharpened steel swirled around him. The rain last night, he whispered. I watched you. You didn't look like a woman good at forgetting. You looked like a woman drowning. The mention of my breakdown pierced my armor. Everyone has a storm they can't escape, Mr. Jang. Some of us just choose to hide it better. Hide it, he repeated, a ghost of a smirk, a baring of teeth touching his lips. Yes. We are both very good at that. He picked up his tea, dismissing me with a coldness that felt like a warning. I walked out, his gaze burning a hole through my back. As the door clicked shut, I leaned against the wall and exhaled. He knew I had seen the leg move, and he was letting me know he was watching me just as closely. The fire was starting to spread. I retreated to the service closet, a windowless room smelling of industrial wax. I sat on a plastic crate, the darkness wrapping around me. I reached into the lining of my cleaning cart, not my purse, but a hidden magnetic pouch. I pulled out a burner phone that didn't exist on any grid. My fingers moved with a muscle memory years of scrubbing couldn't erase. I didn't call the debt collectors. Calling is for victims. I began to map them. Using a signal interceptor I'd built from spare parts, I pinged the number that had called me in the rain. Ping. A luxury apartment in Gangnam. Ping. A shell company. I traced the breadcrumbs to a man named Park, a mid-level enforcer who had mentioned Ji-woo. In my past life, a threat against a child was met with surgical removal. I didn't steal his money. I found what I needed. Photos of him with the rival syndicate's mistress. A terminal sentence. I didn't send them to his boss yet. I simply parked the file on his own desktop with a one-word file name. Ghost. I wanted him to feel the cold breath of a phantom on his neck. I tucked the phone away and stepped back into the hallway. As I passed the foyer mirror, I didn't see a widow. I saw the shadow I had tried to extinguish. I realized then, I wasn't just hiding from the world. I was hiding from the fact that I liked the hunt. I turned the corner toward the nursery and saw him again. Bo-Sik. He was watching his daughter Ji-woo through the cracked door of the playroom. The expression on his face wasn't one of a dawn, but of a man starving for a connection he couldn't allow. He caught my eye. The debt, he said, his voice cutting the silence. How much is it? It's handled, sir, I replied, my voice tightening. Don't lie to me, he murmured, his hands gripping the armrests until the leather groaned. I know who called you, and I know a woman like you doesn't cry over simple numbers. He leaned forward, his eyes like twin pits of fire in the dim hallway. You're playing a game you think you can win alone. But in this city nobody wins alone. I took a step toward him, forgetting I was the maid. And what about you? You're sitting in a chair you don't need, ruling an empire looking for weakness. Are you winning? The tension was a wire ready to snap. He looked at my hands, the hands that had just digitally crippled an enforcer, and then back at my face. I'm surviving, he whispered. Just like you. He spun his chair and vanished into the darkness of his office. He knew I was more than a cleaner. I knew he was more than a victim. We were two predators pretending to be prey, waiting for the other to make the first move. The real danger wasn't the debt collectors anymore. It was the man who had seen me cry, and the ghost I was becoming again just to stay alive. The high-pitched chirp of a perimeter breach is a sound most people would sleep through, mistaken for a distant bird, or a glitch in the city's hum. But to a ghost it is as loud as a hardware shot in a cathedral. It was 3:14 am. I was lying in my small staff quarters on the lower level of the penthouse, staring at the ceiling where the shadows of the city moved like ink in water. I hadn't slept. The numbers of my debt, $200,000 plus the mounting pain interest, were etched into the back of my eyelids. When the silent alarm pulsed on the modified pager hidden beneath my pillow, I didn't sit up. I rolled. In one fluid motion, I was off the bed, my bare feet finding the cold floor without a sound. The penthouse security was top tier, a masterpiece of biometric scanners and infrared grids, but it was designed to keep out armies. It wasn't designed to stop a shadow that knew exactly where the blind spots were. Someone had bypassed the service elevator's encryption. I didn't reach for a hardware. I didn't have one in this life. Instead, I reached into the hollowed-out leg of my nightstand. My fingers closed around a length of high tensile piano wire and a heavy weighted glass paperweight I'd borrowed from the library. I slipped into the hallway. The air in the penthouse had changed. The steady artificial hum of the climate control felt jagged, vibrating against my skin. I moved toward Jiwoo's room first. A mother's instinct is a powerful thing, but an operative's instinct is lethal. I slipped inside the nursery. She was a small, still mound under her silk duvet, her breathing rhythmic and heavy with the innocence of the protected. I didn't stay. To protect her, I had to be where the threat was. I checked the main hallway. 2 shadows were moving toward Bo-Sik's primary study. They were professionals, clad in matte black tactical gear, carrying suppressed submachine hardwares, moving in a staggered formation that spoke of military training. They thought they were walking into the sanctuary of a man who couldn't kick back. They thought the Dragon of Soul was a caged beast with broken wings. I trailed them, a ghost following hunters. I moved through the darkness of the dining hall, my silhouette merging with the expensive tapestries. They reached his double doors. One man leaned in, his thumb hovering over the pin of a flashbang grenade. He never got to pull it. I came out of the shadows like a fever dream. I wrapped the wire around the first man's throat, using his own forward momentum to subdue him backward and upward. His suppressed weapon clattered against his chest as his hands flew to his neck, clawing at the wire that was already biting deep into his flesh. The second man began to turn, but I was faster. I slammed the weighted glass paperweight into the hinge of his jaw. Crack. The sound echoed through the marble hallway, a dry, sickening impact that made my own teeth ache. He went down instantly, his nervous system short-circuiting. The first man was still thrashing, his heels drumming a frantic, dying rhythm on the floor. I tightened the wire, my eyes cold and focused, my pulse a steady rhythmic thrum. I wasn't Makena the Maid anymore. I was the ghost, and these men were a mess that needed to be cleansed. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the study swung open. The amber light from inside spilled out, blindingly bright against the darkness of the hall. I froze, the wire still taut, the gasping mercenary slumped against my shins. Jang Bo-Sik was standing. He wasn't in the chair. He wasn't draped in a cashmere throw. He was on his feet, towering and formidable, dressed in a black silk robe that flowed around him like smoke. In his hands he held a heavy, specialized tool in a steady, 2-handed grip. He looked down at the 2 men, one fighting for a final breath, the other's face shattered. And then he looked at me. His eyes didn't show surprise. There was no shock at seeing his quiet maid standing over 2 professionals. Instead, his gaze held a terrifying, dark satisfaction. He had been waiting for this. He had been waiting for me to reveal myself. I wondered how long it would take for you to stop pretending, he said, his voice a low, melodic rasp that vibrated in the very floorboards I stood on. He didn't lower the hardware. He stepped over the threshold, his gait perfectly steady, his presence overwhelming the narrow hallway. He looked at the wire in my grime-slicked hands, then at the lethal efficiency of my stance. You didn't just notice the dust, Makena, he murmured, stepping closer until the cold muzzle of his weapon was inches from my heart. You've spent your life creating it. Every move you make. It's not the grace of a dancer. It's the economy of a professional. I didn't move. I didn't drop the wire. I felt the heat of his body, the sheer physical gravity of a man who had lied to the world for years just to maintain his edge. And you, I whispered, my voice honeyed with a sudden dangerous edge, have spent yours sitting in a chair, watching people die for you. It seems we both have hobbies we don't put on our resumes. He let out a short, dry laugh, a sound devoid of mirth but full of recognition. He lowered the hardware but he didn't step back. He invaded my space, his chest nearly brushing mine, the scent of expensive sandalwood and hardware oil filling my senses. The men who sent them. They won't stop, he said. his voice dropping to a low, intimate vibration. They know I'm vulnerable. Or they think I am. And your debt? Park didn't appreciate the ghost file you left him. He didn't just get scared, Makena. He got greedy. He's already sold your location to the highest bidder in the underworld. By dawn, your face will be on every burner phone in Seoul. The world outside the penthouse felt like it was closing in. A tightening noose. I was trapped between a man who was a monster and a world that wanted me eliminated. I have a proposal, Bo-Sik said. He reached out, his thumb brushing the line of my jaw. His touch was electric, a caress that felt like a threat. I need a shadow, someone the cameras don't see, someone the syndicate doesn't suspect. My daughter needs more than a cleaner. She needs a guardian who understands the dark as well as I do. He stepped even closer, until I could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. I will erase your debt. Not in 7 days. Not in 1. I will erase it within the hour. I will give you a new identity, a name that doesn't lead to a grave. In exchange, you belong to the Empire. You protect Ji-woo, and you protect the secret of these legs with your life. I looked at his hand on my face, then at the power in his frame. He wasn't offering me a job. He was offering me a cage made of gold, grime, and silk. And if I refuse? I asked, my voice barely a breath. Bo-Sik leaned in, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear. Then you walk out that door. And I wish you luck with the men waiting in the lobby. Because once you leave this floor, Makena, you're just a maid again. And maids are so very easy to break. The silence stretched, long and suffocating, filled with the unspoken history between us. Somewhere in the room behind us a clock ticked, the sound of my old life breaking away. I looked at the man who had lied for years, and I realized I was looking at the only person in the world who truly saw the ghost and didn't blink. I don't just protect. I whispered, my fingers finally uncurling from the wire, letting the gasping man fall to the floor. I eliminate. Bo-Sik's eyes flared with something dark. Not fear, but a hunger that mirrored my own. I wouldn't have it any other way. He reached down, grabbed the collar of the unconscious man and dragged him toward the service stairs as if he were nothing but a bag of trash. He stopped at the door and looked back at me, the light of the hallway casting him in half shadow. Welcome to the inner circle, Makena, he said. Try not to get grime on the marble tomorrow. It's a nightmare to clean. And you're no longer the one with the mop. He vanished into the stairwell, leaving me alone in the dim light. I looked at my hands. They were steady. But for the first time, I realized that in saving my life, I had just signed it over to a man who was far more dangerous than any debt collector. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was an asset. And as I looked at the grime smudged on my knuckles, I knew one thing for certain. The dragon didn't just want a bodyguard. He wanted a queen of the shadows. And I had just given him the keys to the kingdom. To truly immerse your listeners in the suffocating luxury of the cage of secrets, we must slow down the heartbeat of the story. This is no longer about cleaning floors. It is about the agonizing tension of living in the shadow of a man who owns your debt, your identity, and perhaps, your soul. The transition from a ghost to a guardian didn't happen with a fanfare. It happened in the cold, clinical silence of the hour before dawn. I stood in the center of my new quarters, a room 3 times the size of my old apartment, filled with the scent of expensive linen and polished cedar. There was no bleach here, no lemon wax, just the heavy, silent weight of a gold-plated cage. I looked at the clothes laid out on the bed. They weren't a maid's uniform. They were high-end, charcoal gray silks and tactical knits, expensive enough to make me blend into the background of a boardroom, but flexible enough to let me end a man's life in 3 seconds. I ran my fingers over the fabric. It felt like a shroud. My debt was gone. I had checked the burner phone one last time before crushing it under my heel. The account was cleared. Park and his enforcers had vanished from the digital grid, likely scrubbed away by Bo-Sik's silent cleaners. I was clean. But as I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, I didn't feel free. I felt like a weapon that had been polished and put back on the shelf of a very dangerous man. A soft chime echoed from the bedside console. It was 6 a.m. I moved through the penthouse, my footsteps swallowed by the thick Persian rugs. The layout was different now that I wasn't restricted to the service corridors. I saw the cameras, tiny blinking eyes tucked into the crown molding. I knew Bo-Sik was behind them. I could feel his gaze like a physical touch on the back of my neck. I reached the nursery. Ji-woo was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a sea of colorful wooden blocks. She didn't look up when I entered. She was a silent island in this sea of marble and glass. I sat on the floor a few feet away from her, not intruding, just being. I'm not the cleaner anymore, Ji-woo, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I'm here to make sure the monsters stay away. She paused, her small hand hovering over a blue block. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken since the night her mother died, but she turned her head slowly. Her eyes were exactly like her father's, dark, perceptive, and filled with a wisdom that no 5-year-old should possess. She reached out and placed a block in front of me, a red one, the color of a warning, or the color of a heart. Thank you, I said softly. We sat in that silence for an hour. It wasn't the empty silence of a lonely room, it was a heavy, communicative quiet. I watched the perimeter through the corners of my eyes, mapping the shadows, while she built a fortress of wood. She likes you. The voice was a low vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I didn't startle, ghosts don't jump, but my internal temperature dropped 5 degrees. Jang Bo-Sik was positioned in the doorway. He was back in the wheelchair, the cashmere throw once again draped over his paralyzed legs. The deception was back in place, but now that I knew the truth, the sight of him in that chair felt like a coiled snake, waiting to strike. She likes strength, I replied, not looking back. Children know who the predators are. They just choose the ones that will protect them. Bo-Sik whirred into the room, stopping just inches behind me. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and cold rain, wrapped around me, thick and possessive. And which one are you, Makena? He murmured. The predator? Or the protector? I'm whatever you paid for, Mr. Jang. I stood up, my movements fluid and sharp. I finally turned to face him. Being at eye level with him while he was in the chair was a different kind of psychological warfare. He looked small, vulnerable, a lie so perfectly executed it was almost beautiful. You're more than what I paid for, he said, his eyes scanning my new attire with a slow, deliberate intensity that made my skin flush. The gray suits you. It matches the color of your soul. He reached out, his hand hovering near the sleeve of my silk jacket. He didn't touch me, but the air between us sparked with a tension so high it was a wonder the fire alarms didn't go off. I have a meeting today, he said, his tone shifting back to the cold, clinical CEO. A reconciliation with the northern faction. They believe I am weak. They believe my silence is a sign of decay. I want you at my right hand. Not as a maid, as my executive assistant. He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. The world must see me as the broken dragon, but I want them to look at you and feel a chill they can't explain. I want them to wonder why a woman with eyes like yours is standing behind a man in a wheelchair. They'll look for my weapon, I said. Let them look. He whispered, a dark, predatory smirk ghosting over his lips. By the time they find it, they'll already be ended. The meeting was set for the afternoon in the glass room, a suspended boardroom that hung over the edge of the building, offering a terrifying view of the drop below. I stood behind him, my hands clasped in front of me, my expression a mask of bored professional indifference. The rival bosses were there, men with thick necks and expensive watches, smelling of tobacco and arrogance. They looked at Bo-Sik with pity, and they looked at me with a hunger that made my ghost want to tear their throats out. The dragon is getting old. Bo-Sik, one of them laughed, blowing smoke toward the man in the chair. You let a woman carry your briefcase now? What's next? Does she feed you your soup? Bo-Sik didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting limply on his lap. Makena is indispensable, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a mountain. She sees the things I choose to ignore. The rival boss leaned over the table, leering at me. Is that so? What do you see, pretty thing? I didn't blink. I let my gaze drop to the pulse point on his neck. I counted the beats. Fast. Erratic. High grime pressure. I see a man who hasn't realized that the person he's insulting is the only thing keeping the air in his lungs. I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. The room went gravely silent. The rival's smile vanished. He reached for the inside of his jacket, but before his fingers could even touch the leather I had moved. I didn't draw hardware. I simply stepped forward and placed a hand on the table. The sheer speed of the movement, the blurring efficiency of it, froze the entire room. I didn't touch him, I just looked at him. The next move you make, I whispered, will be your last. I don't care about your guards. I don't care about the cameras. I will end you before your heart can finish its next beat. Do you believe me? The man looked into my eyes, the cold, empty eyes of the ghost, and he began to sweat. He slowly withdrew his hand, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Bo-Sik watched the entire exchange from his chair. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The satisfaction in his eyes was radiant. He had found his shadow. When the meeting ended and the men scrambled out like frightened rats, the silence of the glass room returned, but it was different now. It was heavier, intimate. Bo-Sik turned his chair to face me. The sun was setting behind him, casting his silhouette in a crown of fire. You enjoyed that, he said. It wasn't a question. I enjoyed the clarity, I replied, my heart finally beginning to slow down. In that moment there were no secrets. Just life and inevitable end. He moved his chair toward me, stopping so close his knees brushed my legs. He reached up and took my hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm. He didn't hold it like a boss, he held it like a man who was afraid that if he let go, I would vanish back into the shadows. You're a dangerous drug, Makena, he murmured, his voice thick with a longing he couldn't hide. And I think I've been clean for too long. He pulled my hand toward his face, his lips grazing my knuckles. It wasn't a kiss, it was a claim. But remember, he whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. In this empire, everyone is a traitor until they're eliminated. Even you. He let go of my hand and whirred away toward the elevator, leaving me standing alone in the glass box, suspended over the abyss. I looked down at the city lights below, thousands of tiny lives moving in the dark. I was one of them now, a part of the machine. But as I looked at the red block Jiwoo had given me, still tucked into my pocket, I realized the danger wasn't the rivals. It wasn't the debt. It was the fact that for the first time in my life I didn't want to be a ghost anymore. I wanted to be the flame that burned the whole empire down. And the man in the wheelchair? He was the one holding the match. The air in the penthouse always grew thin before a storm. It was a pressurized silence, the kind that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up long before the first flash of lightning split the Seoul skyline. I was in the kitchen, gripped by a restlessness that silk clothes couldn't soothe. I reached for a glass of water, my hand steady, but my mind was drifting back to a rain-slicked alley in another life, to the smell of metallic grime and the sound of my husband's last, rattled breath. I had been ghost then, too. I had been fast, but not fast enough. A low rumble of thunder shook the floorboards. The glass slipped from my hand. It didn't shatter, it hit the plush rug with a dull thud, but the sound was enough. I was suddenly back there. The rain, the muzzle flashes, the cold wet concrete against my cheek. I leaned against the marble counter, my breath coming in jagged, shallow hitches. I was a world-class operative, a woman who had neutralized threats without blinking. And here I was, paralyzed by a sound. It's just noise, Makena. The voice was closer than I expected. I turned, my hand instinctively reaching for the non-existent knife at my thigh. Bo-Sik was there, but he wasn't in the chair. He was standing in the shadows of the hallway, silhouetted by a massive jagged bolt of lightning that turned the sky a violent shade of electric blue. He was wearing only black silk trousers, his chest bare, revealing the tapestry of his own history. He didn't move toward me. He stayed in the dark, his eyes tracking the frantic rise and fall of my chest. The rain, he murmured, his voice a low, grounding hum. It's a trigger for you, isn't it? The same way the smell of ozone is for me. I forced my lungs to expand. I forced the ghost to stand down. I'm fine, Mr. Jang. Just a long day. Don't, he snapped, the word sharp and commanding. He walked toward me then, not the calculated prowl of a predator, but the steady, heavy gait of a man who was tired of carrying his own weight. He stopped inches from me, the heat radiating off his skin like a furnace. No more lies between us. Not tonight. The sky is already screaming the truth. Another crash of thunder. Closer this time. I flinched, my eyes snapping shut. Before I could pull away, his hands were on my shoulders. They were large, warm, and calloused, the hands of a man who knew how to destroy, but right now they were only holding me together. "Look at me," he commanded. I opened my eyes. The kitchen was plunged into darkness as the power flickered and died, leaving us only with the strobing light of the storm. In the flashes, I saw him. Truly saw him. His chest was a roadmap of violence, a jagged puckered scar from a bullet near his collarbone, the long roped line of a blade across his ribs. "You think you're the only one haunted by the ghosts of who you used to be?" He whispered. He took my hand and placed it against the center of his chest, right over his heart. It was beating fast. Hard. This scar? This is where they tried to take my heart. The chair? That was where I hid so they wouldn't finish the job. My fingers curled against his skin. The vulnerability of the moment was more terrifying than any hardware fight. I reached up, my hand trembling as I traced the edge of a scar on his shoulder. "And these?" I asked, my voice a broken whisper. "The price of an empire," he replied. He reached around, his fingers finding the hem of my silk shirt. He didn't move it, but his intent was clear. "And yours, Makena?" "I saw them in the rain. On your back. The marks of a woman who has been through hell and refused to stay there." I didn't stop him. I couldn't. I needed him to see. I turned my back to him, the silk sliding down my shoulders to my waist. The cool air hit my skin, followed by the searing heat of his gaze. I felt his fingers trace the long, jagged line that ran from my shoulder blade to my spine, the mark of the explosion that had ended my husband and birthed the ghost. His touch was clinical at first, then it softened, his fingertips lingering on the damaged tissue with a reverence that made my throat ache. "They tried to break you," he murmured, his breath ghosting over my bare skin. "They succeeded," I whispered, turning back to face him, the silk bunched in my hands against my chest. "They broke the woman. They just left the soldier behind." Bo-Sik reached out, cupping my face with both hands. His thumbs wiped away the tears I hadn't even realized were falling. In the next flash of lightning, his face was inches from mine. His expression a raw, bruised mix of hunger and empathy. "Then we are two halves of a broken blade," he said. He didn't wait for an answer. He leaned in, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that tasted of salt, rain, and years of suppressed longing. It wasn't the polished kiss of a romance novel. It was a collision. It was desperate. It was the sound of two empires crashing into one another. I dropped the silk, my hands finding the corded muscles of his back, pulling him closer as if I could pull his strength into my own lungs. He groaned against my mouth, a low, primal sound, and backed me against the cold marble counter. For a moment there was no dragon. There was no ghost. There was no debt, no paralysis, and no enemies at the gate. There was only the heat of his skin against mine and the violent, beautiful chaos of the storm outside. But then, the thunder gave way to a different sound. The soft, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a helicopter's blades, low and heavy, circling the penthouse. Bo-Sik pulled back, his eyes instantly snapping from passion to cold, lethal calculation. He didn't have to say it. We both felt it. The sanctuary had been breached. The piece of our shared scars was over. He reached under the counter, pulling out a concealed weapon in one fluid motion, and handed me a secondary blade from his waistband. "The storm isn't over, Makena," he said, his voice back to the rasp of the Mafia king. "It's just invited company." I pulled my shirt back up, the silk feeling like armor now. I looked at the man standing before me, strong, scarred, and dangerous, and I felt a cold, familiar fire ignite in my chest. "Let them come," I said, the ghost's voice returning, sharper than ever. I've always been better at cleaning up in the dark. We stood in the flickering shadows, side by side, two monsters ready to defend their cage. The tension wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in our grime. The helicopter's blades continued to beat against the glass, a rhythmic, mechanical heart that drowned out the dying thunder. But the attack didn't come. Not yet. The bird in the sky was a scout, a message, a reminder that the world was watching the dragon's nest. "They won't strike here. Not after the mess you made of their advance team," Bo-Sik said, his voice regaining its icy, boardroom composure as the emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the kitchen in a dim, clinical red. He looked at me, his eyes lingering on the disheveled silk of my shirt, before hardening. "They want to see if I'll break in public." He walked back to his wheelchair, sinking into it with a grace that felt like a tragedy, now that I knew how easily he could stand. He draped the cashmere throw over his legs, the mask settling back over his face like iron. "There's a gala tomorrow night," he said, staring at the red-tinted city below. "The Golden Lily. Every syndicate head, every corrupt politician, and every vulture in Seoul will be there. It is the only place where the snake, the man who holds your debt's origin, feels safe enough to show his face." I stood in the shadows, my heart still hammering against my ribs from the heat of his touch. "You want me to protect you in a room full of people who want you eliminated?" "No," Bo-Sik replied, turning his chair to face me. "I want you to be the reason they're afraid to breathe. To the world, you are no longer the maid. You are my fiancée, the woman who tamed the dragon." The transformation was a slow, agonizing process of becoming a different kind of weapon. The dress was a masterpiece of lethal elegance, midnight blue silk that clung to my curves like a second skin, with a slit that stopped just high enough to hide a ceramic blade, strapped to my inner thigh. My hair was swept up, exposing the line of my throat, and around my neck sat a diamond choker that cost more than the medical debt that had nearly ruined me. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. The ghost was buried under layers of couture, but her eyes remained cold, scanning the reflection for weaknesses. "You look terrifying," Bo-Sik whispered. He was waiting by the elevator, dressed in a tuxedo that made him look like a dark god. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers squeezing mine with a silent intensity. "Tonight, we play a game of shadows in the brightest light. They will try to provoke me. They will try to insult you. They want to see if the dragon's legs have truly rotted, or if he has found a new set of claws. Let them try," I said, my voice as sharp as the blade on my leg. The gala was held in a ballroom of gold and glass, a den of vipers dressed in velvet. As we entered, the room went silent. The Dragon of Soul in his wheelchair, accompanied by a black woman whose beauty was as striking as her silence. The whispers started immediately, vicious, racist, and filled with the stench of old-world arrogance. I didn't flinch. I walked beside his chair, my hand resting lightly on his shoulder. I felt the corded tension in his muscles. He was vibrating with the effort of staying seated while men he hated laughed in his face. "Bo-Sik." A voice boomed. A man approached, middle-aged with a face like a hatchet and eyes that moved like a reptile's. The snake. He was the head of the faction that had hunted me. He looked at Bo-Sik with fake pity before his gaze raked over me, landing on my chest with a disgusting familiarity. "I see you've found a new pet," the snake sneered, blowing cigar smoke into the air between us. "A bit exotic for a man of your status, isn't it? Or perhaps she's just there to make sure you don't fall out of your chair." The room leaned in. This was the moment. They wanted Bo-Sik to snap. They wanted him to stand or to crumble. Bo-Sik's hand tightened on the armrest, but he didn't speak. He looked up at me, a silent command in his eyes. "Handle it." I stepped forward, moving into the snake's personal space until I could smell the expensive cognac on his breath. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned in, my lips inches from his ear as if sharing a lover's secret. "I know about the offshore accounts in Macau," I whispered, my voice a low lethal hum. "I know about the mistress you keep in the blue villa. And I know that the ceramic blade I'm currently holding against your femoral artery is invisible to your security, but it will let you break out on this gold carpet in exactly 42 seconds. I felt him freeze. The color drained from his face, turning him a sickly parchment gray. I smiled then, a cold, empty smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The dragon doesn't need to stand to eliminate you," I murmured. "He has me." I stepped back, smoothing the silk of my dress as if nothing had happened. The snake stumbled back, his hands shaking as he gripped his champagne glass. He didn't say another word. He turned and vanished into the crowd, his tail between his legs. Bo-Sik let out a breath he had been holding for years. He reached up and took my hand, his grip crushing. "That," he whispered, "was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." But the victory was short-lived. Across the ballroom, a woman in a red dress was watching us. She wasn't a guest. She was holding a phone to her ear, her eyes fixed on the way Bo-Sik was holding my hand, not like a boss, but like a man in love. She spoke 3 words into the phone. "The bait is set." As the orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz, Bo-Sik pulled me closer to his chair. "I want to dance," he whispered. "You can't," I reminded him, my eyes scanning the room. "In my mind we are," he replied, his voice thick with a sudden overwhelming emotion. "In my mind I am holding you in the center of this room, and we are the only two people left alive." He looked at me with a vulnerability that terrified me more than any assassin's bullet. For the first time, I realized the danger wasn't the snake or the rival bosses. The danger was the fact that I was starting to believe in the lie. I was starting to believe I could be his queen. But as the lights flickered for a fraction of a second, a signal I recognized from my days in the field, the ghost screamed a warning. A waiter was approaching, his hand tucked into his towel. A camera flash went off from the balcony, but it wasn't a photographer. It was the glint of a scope. "Bo-Sik," I hissed, leaning over him. The first shot shattered the ice sculpture next to us. The room erupted into a symphony of screams. I didn't think, I acted. I shoved Bo-Sik's chair behind a marble pillar, my body shielding his as I drew the blade from my thigh. But as I looked back at the ballroom, I saw the woman in the red dress, smiling. She wasn't looking at Bo-Sik. She was looking at me. And then I felt it, the sharp, cold sting of a needle in the small of my back. My vision blurred. The gold ballroom began to tilt. "Makena." Bo-Sik's voice sounded like it was miles away. I tried to turn, tried to find the ghost inside me, but my limbs felt like lead. As I fell toward the floor, the last thing I saw was Bo-Sik's face. Not the face of a man in a chair, but the face of a dragon who was about to burn the world down to find me. And as the darkness claimed me, I heard a voice whisper in the ear of my soul. The snake didn't want the dragon. He wanted the ghost. The first thing I regained was my sense of smell. It wasn't the sterile, expensive scent of Bo-Sik's penthouse, nor was it the sharp industrial tang of the cleaning supplies I'd used to hide behind. It was the smell of damp earth, old grease, and the metallic, cloying stench of grime, some of it fresh, some of it deeply embedded in the concrete floor beneath me. I tried to move my hands. The familiar, cold bite of steel answered. My wrists were cuffed behind a heavy industrial pipe, my arms pulled at an angle that made every breath a jagged line of pain through my chest. The ghost in me tried to find a rhythm, a way to slow my heart, but the toxin from the needle was still dragging at my veins, making the world tilt every time I blinked. "You're awake. Good. I'd hate for you to miss the end of your own story." The voice came from the shadows, raspy, arrogant, and dripping with the smugness of a man who thought he had won. The snake stepped into the light of a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. He had traded his gala tuxedo for a dark leather jacket, but he still smelled of the same cognac. He walked toward me, his shoes clicking on the concrete. He reached out, his fingers catching my chin and forcing my head up. I spat at his feet. The gesture cost me a wave of nausea, but the look of fury on his face was worth the price. "Do you know what the problem with ghosts is?" He hissed, his grip tightening until I felt the bone groan. "They think they're the only ones who can haunt people. But I've been hunting ghosts since before you were born, Makena. Or should I call you Agent 47? The ghost of the European sector." I didn't answer. I focused on the pipe behind me. It was old, corroded. If I could get enough leverage, I could break the bracket. But I needed time. "Bo-Sik will eliminate you," I whispered, my voice sounding like broken glass. "He will turn this city into a graveyard to find me." The snake laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "Bo-Sik? The man in the wheelchair? He's currently busy explaining to the board of directors and the High Council why he stood up in the middle of a ballroom last night. You see, Makena, the attack wasn't just to get you. It was to force him to show his hand. By saving you, he destroyed himself. He's no longer the dragon. He's just a liar whose empire is being carved up as we speak." A cold dread settled in my stomach. Not for myself, but for the man who had traded his greatest secret, his only protection, for a woman who was supposed to be his shadow. He had stood. He had walked into the light for me. "He's coming," I said, more to myself than to him. "Let him come," the snake sneered. He pulled a phone from his pocket and hit play on a video file. The screen showed the Shinhwa penthouse. It was a mess of shattered glass and grime. My heart stopped when I saw Ji-woo. She was sitting in the corner of the nursery, her small hands over her ears, while men in tactical gear searched the rooms. Bo-Sik wasn't there. I have the girl, Makena. And I have you. If Bo-Sik wants either of you back, he has to walk into the shipyard alone. No guards. No hardwares. Just a broken man coming to claim his broken toys. He leaned in, his eyes gleaming with malice. And when he arrives, I'm going to make him watch while I finish what the debt collectors started. He turned and walked toward the heavy steel door, signaling to 2 hulking guards in the corner. Watch her. If she moves, break a rib. I want her alive, but I don't care if she's whole. The door slammed shut, and the silence of the basement returned, punctuated only by the drip of water from a leaky pipe. Back at the ruins of the penthouse, Jang Bo-Sik stood in the center of his office. He wasn't in the chair. He hadn't sat in it since the moment he saw Makena fall. The High Council of the Mafia was on the line, 12 screens, 12 faces filled with judgment. You lied to us, Bo-Sik. The chairman's voice boomed. For 3 years you played the cripple. You gathered our secrets while pretending to be harmless. That is a betrayal that carries only one penalty. I don't care about your penalty, Bo-Sik said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. He was arming himself. He slipped a 9mm into a holster at his small of back, then checked the magazine of a tactical rifle. You want the Shinwa Empire? Take it. You want the bank accounts? They're yours. But if any of your men stand between me and the shipyard tonight, I won't just eliminate them, I will erase their grime lines. You would trade everything for a maid? One of the council members sneered. Bo-Sik paused, his hand hovering over a picture of Ji-woo and Makena on his desk. A photo I hadn't even known he'd taken. She's not the maid, he whispered, his eyes burning with a fire that could level a city. She's the only reason this empire was ever worth ruling. He cut the transmission, plunging the room into darkness. He didn't call his security team. He didn't call the police. He knew the snake was expecting a broken man. He was going to give him a monster. The air at the shipyard tasted of salt and rot. I had managed to loosen the bracket of the pipe, but my wrists were chafed to the bone. Every time I moved, the guards looked over, their hands on their holsters. I needed a distraction. I needed a spark. I looked at the older guard. He was nervous. He kept checking his watch, kept looking at the door. He knew who was coming. He's already inside. You know, I whispered, my voice echoing in the hollow room. The guard jumped, his hand flying to his hardware. Shut up, woman. He doesn't use the doors, I continued, leaning my head back against the cold pipe. He's the dragon. He's in the vents. He's in the shadows. He's watching you right now, wondering which of your eyes he's going to take first. The guard looked up at the ceiling, his breathing becoming shallow. The psychological warfare was the only weapon I had left. You're lying. He's alone, the boss said. Suddenly, the lights in the shipyard went out. Not a flicker. A total, heavy blackout. A scream cut through the dark. Not a human scream, but the screech of metal on metal. Then, silence. A single shot rang out. Then, another. They were muffled, suppressed. The sound of a professional at work. My guard panicked. He began firing blindly into the dark. Where are you? Show yourself. A voice came from the shadows, a voice I knew better than my own. I'm right here. A flash of muzzle fire illuminated the room for a fraction of a second. Bo-Sik was moving like a blur of black silk and lethal intent. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like the ghost's male counterpart, a man who had been forged in the same fire I had. He reached the guard before the man could reload. I heard the sound of a neck breaking, a dull thud, and then the heavy silence returned. A flashlight clicked on. Bo-Sik stood over the bodies, his chest heaving, his face splattered with grime. He dropped his rifle and ran to me. Makena, he gasped, his hands fumbling with the lock of the cuffs. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He got the cuffs off, and I slumped into his arms. I was too weak to stand, my body finally giving up. He held me against his chest, his heart beating a frantic, violent rhythm against mine. Ji-woo, I choked out, the video. He has her. Bo-Sik pulled back, his eyes searching mine. No, he whispered. Ji-woo is safe. I moved her to the safe house before the gala ended. The video was a fake, Makena. A deep fake to lure me here. He never had her. The relief was so sharp it felt like a blade. But then, the heavy doors of the warehouse creaked open. The snake stood there, surrounded by 20 men with assault rifles. He was smiling. "I knew you'd come for her, Bo-Sik," the snake said, stepping into the light. "But you forgot one thing. I didn't lure you here to end your life. I lured you here to show the world the dragon is eliminated." He pointed to the cameras mounted in the corners of the warehouse. "This is being streamed. To the council. To the city. Every move you make to save her is a nail in your coffin. If you fight, you're a criminal. If you die, you're a failure." Bo-Sik stood up, shielding me with his body. He looked at the cameras, then at the snake. He didn't look afraid. He looked like a man who had finally found peace. "You think the Empire matters to me?" Bo-Sik asked, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You think these people matter?" He reached down and took my hand, pulling me to my feet despite my trembling legs. "I've spent 3 years pretending I couldn't walk," Bo-Sik said, stepping forward into the light, his grip on my hand absolute. "But tonight I'm going to show you what happens when the dragon finally stops playing." He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I reached into the hidden seam of my torn dress and pulled out the backup blade I'd kept for the epilogue. "Let's show them how a ghost cleans a room," I whispered. The snake's smile vanished. He realized too late that he hadn't trapped a man and a woman. He had trapped 2 monsters in a very small box. The tension in the room snapped like a bone. The warehouse erupted. The silence that had held the room captive shattered as the snake screamed a single, panicked command. "Eliminate them. Eliminate them both." I didn't wait for the first bullet to leave a barrel. My body remembered the dance even if my mind was still fighting the fog of the toxin. I dove to the right, rolling behind a stack of rusted shipping crates just as a hail of lead chewed into the wood where I had been standing a second ago. The splintering sound was like 1,000 teeth snapping at once. Across the floor, Bo-Sik didn't dive. He moved with the terrifying upright grace of a man who had been denied his own power for too long. He vaulted over a low concrete barrier, his tactical rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. Pop, pop. Pop, pop. 2 of the snake's men went down before they could even adjust their sights. The dragon wasn't hiding anymore. He was a storm of black silk and hot lead. I stayed low, my breath coming in jagged gasps. My hand tightened around the ceramic blade. I didn't have a hardware, but in a shipyard filled with shadows and narrow corridors, a hardware was a loud, clumsy thing. I was a ghost. I thrived in the spaces between the light. I moved through the labyrinth of crates, my bare feet silent on the cold concrete. I saw a guard flanking Bo-Sik's position, his assault rifle raised. I didn't think. I lunged. I came up behind him, my arm wrapping around his throat, the ceramic blade finding the soft seal between his helmet and his vest. He didn't even have time to grunt. I eased his body to the floor, stripped the hand hardware from his holster and checked the magazine. Full. 1 ghost. 15 bullets, I thought. More than enough. I looked across the expanse of the warehouse. Bo-Sik was pinned down behind a forklift. The metal sparking as the snake's men poured fire onto his position. The snake himself was retreating toward the rear exit, his face twisted in a mask of cowardice. He was leaving his men to die so he could escape the monster he had unleashed. "Bo-Sik," I yelled over the roar of the hardware fire. He looked toward me, his eyes catching the light. I pointed toward the ceiling. He understood instantly. He laid down a suppressive sweep of fire, forcing the guards to duck, while I aimed the hand hardware at the heavy chain holding a massive industrial hook above their heads. I fired 3 times. The metal groaned, a high-pitched scream of failing steel, and then the hook plummeted. It didn't hit anyone, but the weight of it smashed through the concrete floor, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. In the chaos, the dragon moved. Bo-Sik charged through the dust cloud, his movements so fast they seemed blurred. He reached the first line of guards, using his rifle as a club before switching to his sidearm. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. He moved with a cold mathematical precision, turning the shipyard into an eliminator. I moved parallel to him, picking off the stragglers who tried to circle behind him. We were a symphony of violence, the dragon's thunder and the ghost's whisper. We reached the back of the warehouse just as the snake was fumbling with the lock of a reinforced steel door. He turned, his eyes wide with a terror that no amount of money could soothe. He drew a gold-plated pistol, but Bo-Sik was faster. A single shot rang out. The gold pistol clattered to the floor as the snake screamed, clutching his shattered hand. Bo-Sik didn't stop. He walked right up to him, the muzzle of his rifle pressed against the snake's forehead. The air was thick with the scent of cordite and sweat. "You touched my daughter's safety," Bo-Sik said, his voice a low, vibrating growl that made my grime run cold. "You touched the woman I chose. And you thought a chair would keep you safe from me?" "Bo-Sik, wait." The snake whimpered, sinking to his knees. "The council. They're watching. If you end me, you're done. You'll never rule again." Bo-Sik leaned in, his eyes dark, with a terrifying clarity. "I told you, I don't want the empire. I just want you to understand one thing before you die." He looked back at me, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second before returning to the man at his feet. "The dragon doesn't protect the empire," Bo-Sik whispered. "He protects the ghost." He pulled the trigger. The silence that followed was absolute. The cameras in the corners of the room flickered and died. Bo-Sik's technicians had finally cut the feed. The show was over. I slumped against the wall, the adrenaline leaving my body in a sickening rush. Bo-Sik dropped his rifle and crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. He didn't care about the bodies. He didn't care about the grime. He just took my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of my jaw with a desperate, shaking tenderness. "Are you okay?" he gasped, his forehead resting against mine. "Makena, talk to me." "I'm here," I whispered, my hands finding his waist, holding on to him to keep the world from spinning. "I'm here. Is Jiwoo truly safe?" "She's with the only people in the world I trust," he said, pulling me into a crushing embrace. "She's at the temple. She's waiting for us." I pulled back, looking at the man who had burned his entire life down to find me. "You can't go back, Bo-Sik. The council, the city, they know everything now. You're not a CEO anymore. You're a target." He looked at the wreckage of the warehouse, then back at me. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, the first real smile I had ever seen from him. "Good," he said. "I was getting tired of the meetings. Let them come. We'll build a new empire in the shadows, one that belongs to us." He helped me to my feet, his arm wrapped firmly around my waist. We walked out of the shipyard and into the cool gray light of a Seoul dawn. The city was waking up, oblivious to the fact that its king had fallen, and a god had risen in his place. But as we reached the black SUV waiting for us, a single black sedan pulled up across the street. The window rolled down just an inch. A hand emerged, holding a small white envelope. It was tossed onto the pavement before the car sped away. Bo-Sik picked it up. Inside was a single gold coin, the mark of the High Council, and a note written in elegant traditional script. "The dragon has standing, but the ghost still has a debt. The debt isn't to the snake, it's to the origin." I felt the cold return to my bones. The snake was just a middleman. The people who had really destroyed my life, the people who had ended my husband and branded me a ghost, were still out there. And they had just invited us to the real war. Bo-Sik looked at the coin, then at me. He didn't look afraid. He looked like a man who had finally found a reason to fight. "They want a war, Makena?" he asked, his grip on my hand tightening. I looked at the sunrise, the red light reflecting in my eyes. "Then let's give them a massacre." We stepped into the car, the doors closing with a heavy, final thud. The cage was gone, but the hunt had only just been hardware. The air in the high altitudes of the Taebaek Mountains didn't taste like the city. There was no smog, no exhaust, no scent of expensive cologne or industrial bleach. It tasted of pine needles, frozen earth, and the sharp, metallic promise of snow. We had been driving for 6 hours. Bo-Sik sat behind the wheel of the rugged blacked-out SUV, his hands steady on the leather. He hadn't used the wheelchair since the shipyard. Seeing him move, the way his shoulders shifted when he turned the wheel, the way his long legs braced against the floorboards, was a constant, jarring reminder that the man I had served for years had never truly existed. Or perhaps, he was the only thing that was real. "You're quiet," he said, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. I'm remembering, I replied, staring out at the jagged peaks. The origin isn't just a group, Bo-Sik. It's a temple. It's where they take people who have nothing left and turn them into things that aren't quite human. It's where I was born. And it's where my husband was supposed to be safe. I reached into my jacket and touched the gold coin. The council hadn't sent it as a threat to him. They had sent it as a summons for me. A ghost who tries to live a life is a malfunction. And malfunctions in the origin are corrected with cold steel. Bo-Sik reached across the console, his hand covering mine. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to the rising chill of the mountain air. You aren't going back there as their asset, Makena. You're going back as the reason they fail. You don't understand the scale of this, Bo-Sik. You have an empire of money and influence. They have an empire of shadows. You can't strike a shadow. No, he said, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead, but you can burn down the house it lives in. We reached the gates of the mountain estate at midnight. It wasn't a fortress of steel, it was a traditional hannock, ancient and sprawling, tucked into the curve of a cliffside. Torches flickered in the courtyard, their orange light dancing against the falling snow. The engine died. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that precedes an avalanche. Stay in the car, I whispered. Bo-Sik looked at me, a dark, stubborn flare in his eyes. I didn't walk out of that chair to watch you walk into a trap alone. This isn't a boardroom, Bo-Sik. This is my heritage. If they see you, they'll neutralize you just to prove they can. Let me go in first. Let me see who is still alive behind those walls. I didn't wait for his argument. I stepped out into the cold. The snow crunched beneath my boots, a sound that felt like timber fracturing. I walked toward the main gate, my hands empty, my heart a hollow chamber. The gates swung open before I touched them. The courtyard was filled with figures in white, the color of mourning. They stood perfectly still, their faces hidden by wide-brimmed bamboo hats. At the far end of the pavilion sat an old man, his hair as white as the snow, a long smoking pipe held in a withered hand. Master Han, the man who had taught me how to end a life without leaving a heartbeat behind. You've grown soft, 4-7, he said, the smoke from his pipe curling into the freezing air. I smelled the city on you before you hit the tree line. And I smell the man. The one who thinks he owns a ghost. I stopped 10 feet from the pavilion. The debt is paid, master, the snake is felled. The council has their money. Han laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering over a grave. The money was a test for the dragon, the debt. The debt was always about the balance. You left us, Makena. You took the skills of the origin and tried to use them to wipe away coffee stains. You tried to be a wife. You tried to be a mother. He leaned forward, his eyes milky with age but sharp with a terrifying intellect. The explosion that ended your husband wasn't an accident. It wasn't a rival syndicate. It was a graduation ceremony. We couldn't let you have a reason to stay in the light. The world tilted. The ghost inside me screamed, a high-pitched, white-hot frequency of rage that threatened to shatter my ribs. You took him from me? We freed you, Han replied calmly. And now, you've brought the dragon to our doorstep. A man who fakes his passing is a man who understands the value of a lie. But he is a distraction. You are the weapon. He signaled with a slight movement of his pipe. From the shadows of the pavilion, a woman stepped out. She was young, her eyes cold and vacant, her movements an exact haunting mirror of my own. My replacement. Eliminate the man in the car, 4-7. Han commanded. And the debt is truly erased. Fail, and we will find the girl. We will find Ji-woo, and we will bring her here to start her own training. A new ghost to replace the one who broke. I felt the cold seep into my marrow. I looked back at the SUV. Bo-Sik was watching me through the windshield. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew the tension. He was reaching for his hardware. I turned back to Han, my voice a whisper of ice. You shouldn't have mentioned the girl. I didn't reach for a blade. I reached for the torch burning in the sconce beside me. In one fluid motion, I hurled it into the dry paper-walled pavilion. Bo-Sik. Now. I screamed. The SUV roared to life. The headlights swung around, blinding the white-clad figures in the courtyard. Bo-Sik didn't stay in the car. He came through the gate like a battering ram, a tactical high-impact tool in his hands. his face a mask of primal fury. The courtyard turned into a chaotic blur of white silk and orange flame. The Origins students moved like water, but Bo-Sik moved like fire. He didn't use finesse, he used overwhelming force. Every blast of heat cleared a path toward me. I met the younger woman in the center of the burning pavilion. She was fast, faster than I had been in years, but she didn't have what I had. She didn't have a reason to live. She only had a reason to neutralize. We moved in a blur of strikes and parries, the heat of the fire singeing our hair. She drew a blade, a silver flash in the dark. I caught her wrist, the joint locking under my grip, and used her own momentum to hurl her into the collapsing timber of the roof. I turned to find Han. But the old man was gone. Only his pipe remained, smoldering on the floorboards. Makena. We have to go. Bo-Sik was beside me, his hand catching my arm. The roof was groaning, ready to bury us both. We ran for the SUV as the Hannock exploded into a towering pyre. The ancient secrets, the grime-stained wood, the legacy of the ghost. It was all being consumed by the flames I had started. We scrambled into the car and tore away from the cliffside, the orange glow of the fire reflecting in the rearview mirror. Neither of us spoke for miles. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. I looked at my hands. They were covered in soot and dark stains. I looked at Bo-Sik. His shirt was torn, his knuckles were raw, and his eyes were fixed on the road with a grim, unbreakable resolve. It's not over, I said, my voice barely a breath. Han escaped. He'll come for Jiwoo. Bo-Sik slowed the car, pulling over to the side of the mountain road. He turned to me, his hand reaching out to cup my neck, pulling me toward him until our foreheads touched. Let him come, Bo-Sik whispered. We aren't hiding in a penthouse anymore. We aren't hiding in a wheelchair. If they want the girl, they have to go through the dragon and the ghost. And God help them if they try. He kissed me then, a hard, desperate kiss that tasted of smoke and survival. But as he pulled away, I saw something in the road behind us. A single, white crane, the symbol of the Origin, sitting perfectly still in the middle of the asphalt, its eyes fixed on our car. It didn't fly away as we drove past. It just watched. The debt wasn't erased. It had just changed shape. And as the first real snow of winter began to fall, covering the scars in the mountains, I realized that the only way to protect the future was to finish burning the past. The safe house was not a home. It was a concrete bunker buried beneath the roots of an old pine forest, 3 hours north of the smoldering ruins of the mountain temple. Here, the air was recycled and tasted of cold iron, and the only light came from the flickering blue glow of security monitors. This was where the dragon and the ghost finally stopped running. I stood in the center of the armory, my fingers tracing the cold, matte finish of a long-range tool. I wasn't wearing silk anymore. I was back in tactical black, the fabric hugging my skin like a second coat of armor. Beside me, Jiwoo sat on a crate, coloring a picture of a house with a red roof. She was remarkably calm, the daughter of a man who ruled by fear, and a woman who lived in the dark. She didn't need to be told the monsters were coming. She had been born in their shadow. They're crossing the perimeter. Bo-Sik's voice came over the intercom, steady and devoid of emotion. He was in the control room, his eyes mapped to the infrared sensors I had rigged along the tree line. How many? I asked, checking the action on my secondary hardware. 16. Moving in a diamond formation. Han isn't leading them. He's the ghost in the machine today. He's sent his perfected units. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's temperature. The perfected. Students who had undergone the final graduation I had escaped. They didn't feel pain. They didn't feel fear. And they didn't stop until their heart was silenced. Seal the nursery, I said. I walked over to Jiwoo. I knelt in front of her, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Jiwoo, look at me. She looked up, her dark eyes wide and trusting. I need you to stay in the inner room with the big metal door. Your father and I are going to play a game outside. It's going to be loud, but the door is very strong. Do you understand? She didn't nod. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the red wooden block she had been carrying since the penthouse. She pressed it into my palm, a silent trade, her heart for my protection. I closed my hand around the block, then watched as the heavy hydraulic door hissed shut, locking her in the most secure room in the country. I stepped out into the main corridor. Bo-Sik was waiting for me. He was armed with a tactical high-impact tool and a pair of serrated blades. He looked at me, his gaze lingering on the red block I was sliding into my tactical vest. If we don't make it out of this hall, Makena. We make it, I snapped, the ghost's cold fire sparking in my veins. I didn't burn down my past just to let it bury my future. He reached out, his hand catching the back of my neck, pulling me into a hard, desperate kiss that tasted of adrenaline and the end of the world. Then, let's show them why the dragon and the ghost are the only legends left. The first breach happened at the ventilation shaft. The sound was a metallic thrum, followed by the hiss of gas. We didn't wait for them to drop. Bo-Sik sent a surge of force through the ceiling panels, the heavy impact shredding the metal and the threat behind it. A body crashed through the tiles, clad in the white of the origin, its eyes wide and vacant even in its final moment. Then the lights went out. I dropped my night vision goggles into place. The world turned a grainy, ghostly green. I moved into the shadows of the hallway, becoming one with the darkness. I heard them before I saw them, the rhythmic, synchronized breathing of the perfected. They came from both ends of the hall. 8 on 8. I didn't use my hardware. The hallway was too narrow, the ricochet risk too high. I drew 2 short-bladed wakizashis. I met the first wave in a blur of motion. I wasn't thinking. I was reacting to the physics of the encounter. I stepped inside the guard of the first student, my blade finding the gap under his chin. I used his falling body as a shield against the next strike, then spun, my second blade opening a dark river across the path of a woman who moved exactly like I used to. Beside me, Bo-Sik was a wall of pure violence. He didn't have my finesse, but he had a terrifying raw power. He used the heavy hardware like a mace when the fighting got too close, his roars of fury echoing through the concrete tomb. He fought like a man who had been caged for 3 years and was finally, blissfully, free. But there were too many. A blade found the meat of my shoulder. I hissed, my left arm going numb. Another student kicked Bo-Sik's legs out from under him. He went down hard, the old deception of his paralysis nearly becoming a reality as a perfected unit lunged at his chest with a lethal spike. Bo-Sik, I screamed. I threw my blade. It found its mark a millisecond before the spike hit Bo-Sik's heart. He rolled, grabbing his high-impact hardware and clearing the path in front of him with a deafening pulse of power. We retreated toward the final door, the entrance to the nursery. We were scarred, exhausted, our breath coming in ragged, strained sobs. And then, the silence returned. The remaining students stopped. They parted like a white curtain, revealing the shadow at the end of the hall. Master Han. He wasn't wearing white. He was wearing the black uniform of a high-level operative, a cold steel blade held loosely in his hand. "You've done well, 4-7, Han said, his voice echoing through the darkness. "You've shown the dragon what a ghost can truly do. But you've forgotten the most important lesson." He stepped over the fallen as if they were trash. "A ghost has no heart. And because you've found one, you've become weak." "I'm not weak," I said, leaning against the nursery door, my stains marking the steel. "I'm motivated." Han moved. He was faster than anything I had ever seen, a literal blur of black. I raised my blade to parry, but the force of his strike sent me reeling. He was a master for a reason. He turned to Bo-Sik, his blade whistling through the air. Bo-Sik raised his hardware to block, but the blade sheared through the metal like it was paper. Han kicked Bo-Sik back, pinning him against the wall with the tip of his steel at his throat. "Watch, dragon," Han whispered. "Watch the woman you love become the thing she was meant to be." He turned toward me, his eyes twin pits of cold, ancient malice. He lunged. I didn't block. I didn't parry. I let his steel connect. The blade slid through my side, missing my vitals by an inch of calculated risk. As he gasped in shock at my lack of defense, I closed the distance. I grabbed his head with both hands, my fingers finding the pressure points I had been taught as a child. "You taught me how to end a life without a heartbeat, Master," I whispered into his ear as I twisted with every ounce of strength I had left. "But you forgot to teach me how to die for someone." The finality was loud and absolute. Han's body went limp. I pulled his blade out of my side, the agony white hot and blinding, and watched him fall. The origin was finished. The debt was settled in the dark. I slumped against the door, the world beginning to gray at the edges. Bo-Sik scrambled to my side, his hands frantic as he tried to stem the flow of the stain from my side. Makena, stay with me. Look at me. The door, I wheezed. He punched in the code. The hydraulic door hissed open. Ji-woo was there, standing in the center of the room. She looked at us, at the marks, the fallen, and the parents who had turned into monsters to save her. She didn't cry. She walked over to me, her small hand reaching out to touch my face. And then, for the first time in 3 years, the silence broke. Mama, she whispered. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, hot and stinging. I reached into my vest and pulled out the red wooden block, pressing it back into her hand. I kept it safe, I whispered. Bo-Sik pulled us both into his arms, his chest heaving with a sob he had been holding back for an entire lifetime. We sat there in the ruins of our secret. A dragon, a ghost, and the child who had bridged the gap between them. The empire was gone. The penthouse was a memory. The world thought we were fallen. And as the sun began to rise over the pine forest, filtered through the smoke of the battle, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a woman. And I was home. Thank you for journeying through the dragon's ghost. If you loved this deep dive into power, secrets, and a love that burns through the shadows, make sure you're subscribed to Annie's Empire of Love. Don't forget to hit the like button and tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment of the stand? Every bit of love helps us keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay safe in the shadows.